Welcome back to the Ascent Cycling Podcast for the third team preview of the 2021 cycling season. We've done Lotto Soudal, we have done Astana, we are now moving on to the Dutch team of Jumbo Visma. What an incredible team and what an incredible 2020 season for the boys in black and yellow, in the words of Wiz Khalifa. They were very present throughout the entire year, especially after the restart, with the likes mainly of Wout van Aert and Primoz Roglic. We will obviously talk a bit more about Primoz Roglic later on, but what a year he's had and what a rollercoaster of emotion for the Slovenian rider.
Yeah, a great rider for Roglic and the rest of the team, really. I mean, when you think of Jumbo Visma, you think GC, they're all about the GC, the Grand Tours, going for the overall win these days. But looking at their 2020 results, in all four monuments, they were either first or second, winning two of those and second in the other two. Of course, there wasn't Roubaix last year, only four monuments, but that stands out to me as an incredibly versatile team to be in the top two in every monument on the season. They won a Grand Tour, of course, La Vuelta. They almost won the Tour de France with Roglic. We know about that too well. They won Strade Bianca with Wout van Aert too, as well as a few races before lockdown. But like you said, really, their season came to fruition post-lockdown after the return of cycling. And a great season for the team, 23 wins in total. Do you think they can be happy with their 2020 season with the Grand Tour win, missing out on the Tour though, obviously?
Absolutely. They have had a very decent year. Wout van Aert just proving and showing to the world that he's more than just a cyclocross rider. We had seen some glances in the season prior, but I mean, he just really confirmed every hope. And I mean, Groenewegan doing very well in the early season as well, I think. Then lockdown happened, and from the get-go, we've had Primoz Roglic winning both his NCs. We've had Wout van Aert winning in San Remo. We've had Roglic winning here and there. George Bennett, I think, getting a win as well in Gran Piemonte. You've mentioned the performances on the monuments with George Bennett doing very well. Then obviously the Tour de France, which I think is the highlight of their season, but maybe not a good highlight. Because everything seemed to go their way. Bernal wasn't in the greatest of shape. Thibaut Pinot wasn't in the greatest of shapes. And with the lineup and the team around Primoz Roglic, I don't think many people were able to predict what was going to happen on that stage 20 of the Tour de France. And I mean, it's a second place on the Tour. They even won that stage that day with Tom Dumoulin. We'll talk about Tom Dumoulin as well in a later portion of the pod. But then Roglic stayed in, managed to keep his head into the game and delivered a great Vuelta. I think podiuming like the first three stages of the race, getting was it three stage wins?
Four,
three or four
stage wins, I think, in total.
4 stage wins, yeah. Plus the GC. It was a way for him to prove himself that he could win, obviously, a Grand Tour. He showed that before, but with the L on the Tour de France, some could have argued that he was going to lose it, but he didn't. And obviously, prior to that, he won Liège-Bastogne-Liège in a very odd Liège-Bastogne-Liège, very odd finish. But of course, yes, in my opinion, Jumbo can be extremely happy with their year.
Yeah, I think if you ask this question the day after the Tour, you'd probably say no, but the way Roglic came back really shows mental strength in massive amounts, winning LBL and, like you said, La Vuelta. So great mental strength and recovery by Roglic, really to rescue, I think, his season because the Tour would have been a big blow.
Looking at the 2020 transfer window for Jumbo Visma, we have 6 arrivals for 5 departures. Out of the 5 riders leaving, there is one big name. The name being Laurens de Plus, the Belgian going to Ineos Grenada, the 25-year-old former winner of the Bing Bang Tour, going, as I said, to the British team of Ineos. He just didn't fit anymore in the plans of Jumbo Visma, and from the day the transfer was announced, he actually got less and less opportunities to perform with the Dutch outfit. But regarding the other riders, we have Tom Laser, We've got Amund Grøndal-Jansen going to the team Bike Exchange, previously Mitchelton. We've got Bert-Jan Lindemann going to Kubeka Assos, and we have Taco van der Hoorn going to Intermarché. So some domestics, some decent riders when it comes to the cobbles, Van der Hoorn and Amund Grøndal-Jansen, and Bert-Jan Lindemann, just a very, very decent domestic. And they are being replaced by Sam Oomen from Sunweb, who directly replaces Laurens de Plus in the hierarchy. Nathan van Hooydonk, the Belgian from CCC. Edoardo Affini, a very, very interesting signing. The Italian, the time trialist from Mitchelton Scott, who performed well in the European Championships, mainly if I remember correctly, and also won a stage, I believe, on the Tour of Britain. And then 3 young riders, starting with David Dekker, the sprinter from Seg Racing Academy, and 2 riders from their development team, starting with Gijs Leemreize and Olav Kooij.
So, a fair few transfers for the team. I'm in full agreement with you that Laurens de Plus is a big loss, and I think he could actually be a bigger loss than Jumbo Visma hoped for. He had a very quiet, even a nightmarish 2020. He had some injuries, didn't really get any race days in, like you said, didn't go to a Grand Tour, and he's still just 25 years old. This is a man who won the Bink Bank Tour and also has shown that he can really live with the best guys in the mountains at Grand Tours. He is a very versatile rider, and when in form, I really, really rate Laurens de Plus. I am backing him to do well at Ineos, and I think he could be a big loss for this team, if I'm honest with you. You said they replaced him with Sam Oomen. I'm not quite sure whether Sam Oomen can deliver the same kind of help to the leaders that Laurens de Plus has done in the past. He's had a few off seasons, Sam Oomen. I think he had an issue with his artery similar to Fabio Aru, actually, which he hasn't seemingly recovered from just yet. At least he was good at the Giro a few years ago. I haven't seen him really back to that level in the last couple of seasons. So hopefully Sam Oomen can rediscover that form. What do you think? Can Sam Oomen fill in for Laurens de Plus?
In my opinion, they're 2 different riders in the sense that Laurens de Plus might be a bit more versatile than Sam Oomen is. But should Sam Oomen recover and find the glimpse of talent he had shown back in the days, I think he's a better climber than Laurens de Plus. And he doesn't come here to fill in the GC or a leader position, which is probably something Laurens de Plus sometimes had hoped for. So I feel like from that point, it's a better decision from Jumbo. He finished in the top 20, I think, of the Giro as a teammate for Wilke Kelderman and for Jai Hindley, who would then podium the Giro. So I feel like he's shown that he can still climb, but it's not a rider as versatile and complete as Laurens de Plus, in my opinion.
It's interesting you say he's a better climber, because in my opinion, I'd actually have de Plus down as a better rider in general and probably a better climber. If you look back to 2019 at the Tour, Laurens de Plus was in the top 15 on the Col de Tourmalet, and that's when he's working for the likes of Steven Kruijswijk. So, I don't know. I really rate Laurens de Plus. If he's back to his best this season, he could be much more than a domestique for Ineos.
Well, I feel like for Ineos, it's a great acquisition. It's an incredible acquisition from them to have a rider such as Laurens de Plus. But I feel like where Jumbo is going to be winning is from the internal aspect in the team. As I just said, Laurens de Plus was maybe looking to be a leader or to fill in a role that Jumbo just could not offer. And I feel like Sam Oomen will not have those kinds of wishes in the team.
That's fair. Moving on though, I think we'll take a look at Edoardo Affini, who is an interesting acquisition. He's a very strong, or a time trial specialist really, but I'm not certain about this signing. I'm really not. I think it's quite a popular signing in general, but I'm not sure Affini is to the level Jumbo Visma will be looking for. I guess he could long term be a potential Tony Martin replacement, working on the front a lot, maybe not going for himself very often at all in this team. But looking at his results last season, he was well off Ganna. I know we're talking about Pippo Ganna here, but he was over a minute and a half behind him at the Italian NC. I'm not sure. Affini, I'd like him to do well this season, and I guess he'll be filling in a domestique role for that. He's going to be fine. Whether he can challenge in the top time trials going forwards, I'm not sure. He's still young. What do you think? Do you think I'm being a bit harsh on Affini?
No, it's funny that you mentioned that his potential career could turn into Tony Martin. Obviously not with the same level of success. I mean, I wish him the same level of success, but I just don't feel like he's got that. But it was a comparison I was actually going to make if you hadn't done so. He's had a tough 2020, not only finishing a minute and a half behind Pippo Ganna, who would then become world champion, but also losing, I think, a minute 30 on Stefan Kung on the European Championships. It's tough because I feel like he's got the legs. He's a very capable time trialist, and he's shown promises when he first joined Mitchelton Scott. But I feel like last year he just couldn't confirm those hopes. And what Jumbo have seemed to do over the past couple of years is to show some riders and to put them on the first step of the scene. And maybe Eduardo Affini can just evolve a bit as a time trialist, but also maybe as a GC rider. He can go over some hills. He's not by far a good climber, or at least not the greatest of them. But he could become a decent helper on hilly or mountainy stages.
Another name that intrigues me in their signings is David Decker. 22 years old, very young, talented sprinter. He came on the podium last season at Le Saman, which to me shows he has one-day classic abilities. He's more than just a pure sprinter. He can live with a difficult tempo, difficult conditions. So I think David Decker is a good signing for these guys, and his dad actually did ride for this team under a former name, and unless I'm mistaken, Eric Decker, David Decker's father, is the current holder of the most wins for this team. So David Decker could be one to watch. Anyhow, there has been some massive recent news regarding the team. We haven't mentioned him yet, but Tom Dumoulin has announced he will be taking a prolonged break from cycling just days after announcing his schedule for the 2021 season. Came as a massive shock, I think, to pretty much everyone. Dumoulin, he shows he can still ride a GC race last season. Obviously, he wasn't as strong as Roglic at the Tour, but I still had hopes that Dumoulin could recover this season and go for a Grand Tour in his own right, rather than working for Roglic. It's a big blow for the sport as a whole, I believe, as well as, of course, Jumbo Visma. Guillaume, what do you make of this Dumoulin news?
Did it come as a shock? Yes. Could people have seen it coming? I also think so. I think we haven't seen the Tom Dumoulin we had seen with Sunweb over the past couple of years. And we saw with Marcel Kittel a couple of seasons ago that sometimes when you just don't feel good mentally, your legs cannot perform. And I think it's what happened with Tom Dumoulin. He said on Twitter that he felt like the pressure to perform was just too much, and that it took over his actual health, and that's not a good thing. I mean, I'm not teaching anyone here, but when your brain doesn't work well, you can't. I mean, if you're not happy when you do something, you just cannot do it well. And it's a shame to see him go. It's a shame to see him taking a break. But I feel like overall, it's a good move for him. I think it showcases also something. It showcases the toughness and the sacrifices you have to make when you're a professional athlete or a cyclist, when you have to be from January to October traveling, or not traveling, but going everywhere in the world, and you can't spend sometimes with your family or not as much time as some people would like to do. And I think it's a good thing to show that the mental aspect is actually being taken care of in cycling, with Jumbo being extremely supportive of Tom's decision. Now, I think it raises another question: is Tom Dumoulin ever going to be a professional cyclist. There was some debates on that matter on the internet and over the past couple of days since that decision was announced. And I would love to see Tom back on the bike. He's mentioned in his interview with Jumbo Visma that he still wants to win the Tour de France. I'm not confident, sadly. I would love to see him back, but I just don't feel like he'll ever get the mental strength to go back on the bike and to undergo the entire process of getting in shape and then readying yourself to 3 weeks, knowing that everything can be over very quickly, and also in an era where there's a lot of riders competing for that top step. He's in a team with Primoz Roglic, with Steven Kruijswijk, with Sepp Kuss. How does he fit in that hierarchy if and when he comes back? I don't know.
Like you, I'm really sad to say I think we could have seen the last of Tom Dumoulin. You mentioned Kittel. Very similar situation. I believe Kittel actually announced he was going to take a break as well before announcing his official full retirement. So there are some similarities there. It was at a similar age as well. Dumoulin now 30 years old. I think Kittel was 30 as well. And yeah, I'd love to see Dumoulin back. I watched the Giro d'Italia 2017, some highlights from that race, of course. The only Grand Tour win of Dumoulin's career. And it was great to see. He was just an absolute powerhouse at that race, and he still has so much to offer to the sport. But if he's not feeling good mentally, if he's not enjoying himself, I think it's completely the right decision he has to make. It's a difficult decision to make for him, for sure. I think it's the right one, though, if he is struggling, like he has, of course, said he is, to step away from the sport, whether that's for 6 months, a year, 2 years, or even less, or for good, who knows. But hopefully for the sport we do see Dumoulin back, but Dumoulin probably not back in the first 6 months of this season for sure, if you had to ask me.
I'm trying to think of how I could compare the departure of Dumoulin, because for many people, some started watching cycling a couple of years ago, and some started watching as Tom Dumoulin was a rising star, obviously finishing second of the Vuelta, of the Giro, and the Tour de France in 2018, winning the Giro in 2017, performing well in 2015 was it, I think, on the Vuelta, where no one really expected him to do well, and nearly winning the Vuelta actually. And I think some could argue it's comparable to Andy Schleck's departure, which was obviously different, but he just didn't feel like himself at one point in his career, and it just went downhill. Andy Schleck kept on riding and kept on not performing. I think Tom Dumoulin might want to avoid doing that, and it's a real loss for the sport, but it's a loss also for those who started watching cycling through Tom Dumoulin.
He was such a talented rider, because he wasn't naturally a Grand Tour rider. He was a time trialist and good on the flat roads. I think he won the Eneco Tour or podium that race at least a few times. Cobbled races, time trials were his speciality. He transformed himself into a Grand Tour machine, and if it wasn't for Froome and Team Sky at the time, I'm certain this man would have had at least one Tour de France in his pocket already. And perhaps even, maybe controversial, if he was riding for Sky, he could well have been the leader as well, because he was just an absolute powerhouse, and still is, to be fair. It's a big loss. Hopefully we see him back.
We are now in the part of the podcast where we're going to talk about a few riders that are going to be crucial to Jumbo Visma, and how can we not talk about Primoz Roglic, the 31-year-old Slovenian former ski jumper? I feel like it has to be repeated every time there's some news on Primoz Roglic. He's been with Lotto, or at the time Lotto, since 2016, and he kept on performing and on improving year in, year out. What a 2020 season he's had. We've mentioned him a bit early on, but he finished second of the Tour de France behind Tadej Pogačar, a Tour de France that I would argue he had the legs to win had he done maybe a bit more on some mountain stages. I feel like maybe he was a bit nice with Tadej Pogačar. And Tadej bit him in the arse, if you will allow me the expression. He then bounced back to win La Vuelta in a spectacular fashion ahead of Richard Carapaz and Hugh Carthy, showing at the end though some toughness in the mountains, and proceeded to win La Vuelta, which is his second Grand Tour, I believe, after La Vuelta of 2019. So back-to-back Grand Tours for the Slovenian. And also his first ever monument, with the win in Liège-Bastogne-Liège ahead of Julien Alaphilippe, who would then go on to be disqualified. So Mark Hirschi taking second, Tadej Pogačar in third.
The thing that strikes me so much about Roglic is I think he's improved every single season. He's now into his 30s, 31 years old. I think he did ride, and Jumbo Visma probably could have changed the way they rode the Tour. They probably felt like they were in control of the race or they felt like they were too much in control of the race compared to how they actually were, because the gap to Pogačar was never massive, and I think Roglic had some moments where he had the opportunity to attack. Earlier on, he was very conservative, relying on his time trial, which usually would have got the job done. As we know all too well, on La Planche de Belfi, that didn't happen, didn't come to fruition. But the mental strength from Roglic, I mentioned it earlier, really, really strikes me after the Tour. Winning LBL, obviously it was controversial the way he won that race, but then La Vuelta also, he finished the week, he finished the third week of La Vuelta probably slightly worse than how he started the race, and that is a trend with Primoz Roglic. He does seem to fade in third weeks of Grand Tours. We've said it before, he's done it on the Giro in 2019. He did it on La Vuelta this year as well, with Carapaz coming to 24 seconds in the GC down on Roglic on the Alto de la Covatilla, where Carapaz really attacked early. So I think if we had to define a weakness for Roglic, it would perhaps be his third weeks at Grand Tours, which is obviously going to be crucial if he is one day going to win the Tour de France. But I can see him winning multiple stage races again this season, maybe some classics as well. Maybe the likes of Il Lombardia could be another monument on Roglic's mind for 2021. But the goal is going to be the Tour de France. What do you think? Is he going to win the Tour de France in 2021? The big question.
Will Primoz Roglic win the Tour de France in 2021? My answer is going to be no. Will he win a Grand Tour next year? Most likely. I just don't feel like he's going to win the Tour de France. Although I'd love it. But I don't know. I feel like there's something about the Tour de France, and Primoz Roglic right now hasn't found the key to unlock that. I think it probably is the third week, which is often very hard on the Tour de France. I don't know. I feel like he's probably the biggest threat on 1 week races. I don't think anyone can really challenge him. Yeah, I'm going to go for the three-peat on the Vuelta though for Roglic next year.
Wow, that is a big claim, and I actually think this team may have other riders that may be looking to ride GC in that race, but we'll touch on that a little later on. Roglic is an unbelievable talent. Is he going to win the Tour de France this season? I'm not sure. Almost 60 kilometres of individual time trialling certainly does help the Slovenian, even though he may have slightly declined in the time trial whilst he's improved his climbing abilities in recent kind of months and maybe the last season if you look at his results on paper. But yeah, we know Roglic is going to be the favourite for pretty much every race he enters, every stage race he enters, at least in 2021. So I mentioned there may be another rider in this team that will want to ride La Vuelta and maybe will be looking to ride the GC as well at the race, and I believe that man could be Sepp Kuss. Now, he's 26 years old now, which I usually think of Sepp Kuss as in his early 20s, but he's now kind of into his mid to late 20s. Sepp Kuss is, for me, one of the top 5 climbers in the world. I think he's shown that for sure, acting as a domestique pretty much entirely for Primoz Roglic. He is always there or thereabouts, and often, to me, it seems he does look stronger than Roglic on the old climb, and I would love to see Sepp Kuss ride a Grand Tour as a GC leader, or even a dual GC leader alongside Roglic, rather than acting really as a super domestique, which he's been forced to do. Am I being a bit ambitious for Sepp Kuss? Do you think he can win a Grand Tour or at least compete for a GC?
I think mainly that showed on the Vuelta. There was a few stances where Sepp Kuss just dropped Roglic without even trying to do so. So it shows that he's got the legs, and if he was given his personal card, he could most likely do well. The one thing that goes against him right now, for me, is his time trial ability. Now, I don't know if he was doing the time trials as well as he could have on the Vuelta and the Tour de France, because obviously he acted as a teammate and wanted to maybe keep some strength for the upcoming stages, but he lost more than 3 minutes on Primoz Roglic on the time trial on La Vuelta. I believe he finished light years behind Tom Dumoulin on La Planche de Belfi, maybe I think 7 minutes or more than that, which are time trials that technically could suit him more than a flat 50-kilometer time trial, for example. So it's an interesting one. He's now 26, as you mentioned. He's got some experience. The next Grand Tour he will do will be his 6th. He's gradually evolving. He's had a promising 2019. He's had a very good 2020. Can he have an even better 2021? And if so, what could we consider a better 2021? I don't know if he's going to win a Grand Tour, but if he has his chance as a leader, I do believe that a podium is on the table for the young American.
The issue is, I don't think he's going to be given the opportunity. Now, I've already said I think he deserves that opportunity. I'm not sure he'll be given the chance to ride GC even at the Vuelta, especially if Mr. Primoz Roglic is alongside him. Dumoulin, obviously taking a break, perhaps does open up a slightly bigger opportunity for Sepp Kuss to maybe act as the second GC guy behind Roglic. But you mentioned his time trial. It is his big downfall. I'm by no means saying Sepp Kuss is a better GC rider than Primoz Roglic, but he has shown he can be one of the best climbers in the world, and I believe this is a contract year for Sepp Kuss as well. So perhaps if he's not given the chances that he desires, he could be looking elsewhere come the end of the season.
It's very important that you've mentioned his contractual situation, because there are quite a few teams actually looking at Sepp Kuss, and the main one, in my opinion, would be EF, as they are an American-based team. How incredible would it be to have an American winning a Grand Tour in an American team? I feel like there's something to do here, and if Jumbo doesn't pick up on the chance they have with Sepp Kuss, they might lose him just like they lost Lance de Plus. We've mentioned Primoz Roglic, we've mentioned Sepp Kuss. There was only one GC rider we haven't mentioned yet, and that is obviously Steven Kruijswijk, a rider that broke the heart of a nation back in 2016, where he seemed to have everything going his way and then encountered a literal wall of snow. He even finished outside of the podium in 4th position. Steven Kruijswijk had a very difficult 2020, and it's going to be important to see what he does, because he's now on the age where winning a Grand Tour might be out of the question in a year or two for Kruijswijk. He hasn't won a lot of things in his career. I think he's won, like, his biggest win is the Arctic Race of Norway, which is staggering for a rider that showed so many promises. He's obviously a podium finisher on the Tour de France. But last year was tough. I think he didn't ride before the lockdown, and then he had a decent Tour de l'Ain, DNF'd on the Dauphiné, and then did not start on the Giro. It's difficult to argue to have a worse season, than he's had in 2020, but we know he can climb well. And with Dumoulin gone, I think that still gives him the shot at GC. I think in the hierarchy he's still above Sepp Kuss to the eyes of Jumbo. At least that is what I'm gonna think about. He most likely will target the Tour de France, such as Roglic. He most likely will double a Grand Tour, whether it's the Giro or La Vuelta. We don't know yet. Maybe Roglic and Kruijswijk will target both Tour and Vuelta, which could prevent him from having a GC chance. But he is, in my opinion, still a very, very competent rider when it comes to 3 races.
I think this man is a bit of a sleeper at the moment. Like you said, he's 33 years old in the sense that people are forgetting about Steven Kruijswijk. He is still a very, very, very capable GC rider. And even last year, like you said, a nightmarish season. He crashed at the Dauphiné, put him out of the Tour. Then he contracted COVID whilst at the Giro. Whether he would have gone on to podium the race, I'm not sure. But before his crash at the Dauphiné, he was strong at the Tour de l'Ain. He was behind, I think, Quintana, Bernal and Roglic only in the GC. And the Dutchman is someone, for me, who always seems to improve as a 3-week race goes on. You can always rely on Kruijswijk going into third weeks at Grand Tours. So I really think Kruijswijk could be a genuine option at the Tour de France for this team. I think they should go in with him as a dual leader with Primoz Roglic and try and keep Kruijswijk there or thereabouts, and try and send either Kruijswijk or Roglic up the roads and try and play that card, because I really think this man is a really strong GC rider. He can TT well, in addition to his climbing abilities. Do you think I'm being a bit generous to Kruijswijk? I mean, like you said, he hasn't won much in his career. He was set to win the Giro in 2016. Let's be honest, he would have won without the crash on the descent. I really rate him, and I think we could be surprised by what he achieves in 2021.
I don't think you're being over-ambitious. I just want to see how 2021 is going to go for him, because 33-year-old now, you've called him a sleeper. That's a decent description, but with the 2020 he's had, he probably hasn't had the most... Well, he hasn't had the most race days, that's for sure. He's had a tough year, and having a year off when you're a GC rider sometimes doesn't give you the best of hopes for the upcoming season. I mean, Christopher Froome might have been the prime example of that this year on the Vuelta in a different level, I guess. But no, he's definitely a capable rider, and if he has the legs he's had, for example, on the Tour de France in 2019 or on the Giro in 2016, he is going to be a threat to whoever wishes to win a Grand Tour on which he's participating.
One thing I will add is I think he said he will not be riding the Giro this year, so I think he's going to go to the Tour and then perhaps the Vuelta, which surprises me, to be honest, because no Kruijswijk, no Roglic, and I believe no Sepp Kuss at the Giro for Jumbo Visma. So perhaps they're kind of skipping the Giro as an option for GC, really focusing on the Tour, and then maybe the Vuelta later in the year.
I mean, they did something similar this year. They still have George Bennett.
The New Zealander, George Bennett, I think it would be fair to say, coming off his best season yet. Close to winning a monument at Il Lombardia. He was in fantastic form for the Italian races, like you said, winning Grand Prix Monte as well in the days leading up to Il Lombardia. Do you think George Bennett is a genuine GC option at a Grand Tour?
I mean, I'm going to be very upfront. No, I don't think so. He is still a very capable climber. Will he win a Giro? No. Especially when you take a look at the competition, when you know that someone like Pinot, someone like Landa, someone like Bernal is going to be there, or even Vlasov, as we've mentioned in the Astana podcast. I just know, but he might target a top 5. You never know. I think Jumbo knows how to do Grand Tours. If you have a solid team around him, I think Bennett is a top 5 rider, but Jumbo, for me, focuses on the Tour and La Vuelta.
I think he maybe it's a bit harsh, but I think he probably took advantage of the pandemic last season with not too many riders heading to Il Lombardia, for example. I think Astana and Trek were the only 2 teams, as well as Remco, of course, who really went all out to win that race, taking their best riders there with issues of travelling between Italy and France ahead of the Tour de France. So maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but perhaps that was part of the reason he was able to do so well in Italy. And like you said, I don't think he's a Grand Tour winner, Grand Tour contender in Grand Tours, to be honest, but a very strong super domestique, if nothing else. And he has shown he can definitely be a contender for the one-day races, where the road goes uphill. I think, to this point in the podcast, we are yet to mention, perhaps, the best rider in this team. And he goes by the name, of course, of Wout van Aert. 26 years old, he has developed from a cyclocross star into an all-round cycling superstar, really, with his 2020 form. He looked unbelievable last season. He won Strada Bianca, his first monument in Milano San Remo, stage at the Dauphiné. He won 2 stages at the Tour de France. I think he probably would have won more as well had he not been acting for Roglic, which he did superbly, better than I think anyone expected in the mountains. I mean, he was right there on the Grand Colombier. He was dropping the likes of Bernal, if I'm not mistaken. I know Bernal had issues, but he was still on the front of the peloton when there were about 20 riders left in that group. He was so good in the mountains at the Tour. Runner-up at both the World Championship events, and then, of course, pipped to the line at the Tour of Flanders, missing out on what would have been his second monument of the season. Is there a race this man can't win? I know there's been talk that Van Aert could challenge for a Grand Tour. Maybe optimistic. If the TT kilometres are there, I don't know if there's anything this man can't do. He's going to be the favourite for the likes of Roubaix, pretty much all the monuments next season. And I think one of his targets, instead of the yellow jersey in 2021, will be the green jersey. What do you think?
It's a common assumption that cyclocross riders often make good GC leaders. The prime example would be Kate Evans, who went on to win the Tour de France. You had at a lower level someone like Jean-Christophe Perrault in his days, who also podiumed the Tour de France. Now, Wout van Aert, he's an enigma for me, because I just don't know how to classify him. Do I classify him as an all-rounder because he can be one of the best everywhere? Or do I have to give him a, I don't know, classic man, but then he goes on to perform absolutely incredibly at the Tour de France? I mean, you've mentioned the Grand Colombier. The one stage I have in mind is the stage between Méribel and La Roche-sur-Foron, which was the 1-2 of Ineos, one of the most important images we've had during the Tour. But he finished third of a mountain stage with actual mountains. Like, there was the Cormet de Roseland, if I think correctly, there was the Col des Aravis, and how? He finished third ahead of every single GC guy. He dropped Uran 3 minutes behind. He had dropped, I think, Adam Yates as well. I mean, this man can do it all, and you've mentioned talks about him maybe aiming for a GC. There was also talks about him maybe going to Ineos at one point later on, and I mean, if he does go to Ineos, I think Ineos can genuinely make him win every single race he takes part in his career. So it's going to be interesting. But I mean, he can time trial well. He was second at the World Championships. He was fourth on the Planche des Belles Filles. He got 8th in Groenewegan, I think. He won a monument. It's just, this man, he's so complete. We've talked about versatility early on with Lorenz de Plus, but if versatile was to have a description or a definition in the dictionary, I think Wout van Aert would be a suitable one.
I mean, if there was a contender in the peloton right now to win all 5 monuments, I know Phil Gilbert is only in need of Milano San Remo. Has to be Wout van Aert, right? Because he can handle the climbs in Il Lombardia, I think, and he can win every other monument for sure. The Tour of Flanders, Paris-Roubaix, I'm sure he will win at least once in his career each, probably multiple times if he's able to stay healthy and fit and rise to this level for the years to come. And I see no reason why he can't do that. Him riding a Grand Tour for the win, for the GC, would just be incredible. I'd love to see it. But you mentioned the talk of Ineos. He has recently announced his contract extension at Team Jumbo Visma to 2024 now. So he's tied down. It's a big commitment for the team and for Van Aert to make, for sure, because he was denied the green jersey at last year's Tour de France. There is no doubt he would have won the green jersey if he was allowed to ride for himself, if he had riders helping him in the sprints. I'm in no doubt that he would have won the green jersey last year. I think he should be allowed to go for it this year as well. I think he will probably win it this year at the Tour de France. He'll probably win a monument, I would say. I think he can expect to win San Remo or Roubaix because, like you say, he is a genuine all-rounder. He showed he can climb. He can get over the hills of the likes of Strada Bianca. He's one of the best on cobbles. He can TT with the best of them, second at the World Championships, only behind Ghana. He can sprint. He won a bunch of sprints at the Tour de France. He is unbelievable. He is just an unbelievable rider. And I think he can win everything in the world of cycling. Maybe bar a GC at a Grand Tour, which would just make him a god among men in the current peloton.
I mean, yeah, of course, yeah. I think the one factor also that I love about Wout van Aert is the fact that if I think of Wout van Aert, my brain also thinks about Van der Poel. For me, those two are very linked, and to know that we're gonna have a 2021 season where Wout van Aert is most likely gonna be competing with Mathieu van der Poel on most of the races, so like Milano-San Remo, the classics. I mean, I think Mathieu's doing the Tour de France.
I believe he will be doing the Tour de France this year.
I think he is doing the Tour de France. I mean, those two are just simply unbelievable. The Ronde van Vlaanderen last year was one of the most hyped races because we knew that Van der Poel would face Van Aert. We had Alaphilippe in the bunch, but I mean, he crashed. But Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert, name a better rivalry we've had this year, or in the we can have as well in the coming years. I can't really think of many.
Particularly if you're not considering any GC battles, I think it has to be the main rivalry. They are very, very linked, of course. Cyclocross rivals for many years before coming to the road together. They joined the roads at a similar time. And yeah, I'm suddenly having doubts about that green jersey if Van der Poel is going to the Tour as well, because seeing those two fight for it, maybe if Sagan can get back to his best, we may see him there as well. Those three guys going for the green jersey. Maybe Sam Bennett will be looking to defend it as well. I'm not sure he will be able to, with Van der Poel and Van Aert going for it at 100%. But seeing these two guys go against each other at the Tour de France, I cannot wait for it.
I think the final rider we have to mention in the Jumbo Visma squad is a rider who was in a huge controversy and mainly a huge crash last season. Dylan Groenewegan, the 27-year-old sprinter, 4-time stage winner on the Tour de France, who started off the season somewhat well in Spain. I think 2 stage wins and the green jersey in Valenciana, a stage win at the Dubai City Walk on the UAE Tour, and then at the restart for the first stage of the Tour of Pologne, having this horrendous crash, sending Fabio Jacobsen to the ICU and in need of a lot of medical attention. Following that crash, Dylan Groenewegan was banned. I have his upcoming participations in front of me right now. The best race he will have next year from a UCI category would be the Euro Eyes C-Classics Hamburg or the Bing Bang Tour. I don't know if it's necessarily a punishment from Jumbo Visma or just a desire not to send him on a Grand Tour. I think one of the factors also is maybe mental. It's always hard to undergo such a crash, I guess, and just go back on the bike and do what you've been doing for the last years. Very torn for him. I don't know what's going to happen for him, whether it is next year or in the coming years.
It's a massively difficult situation, I think, for everyone. For Jumbo Visma, for Groenewegan, obviously for Jacobsen, De Koenig. Really, really tough situation for everyone. Obviously, he was probably at fault for the crash. We don't need to discuss that. Talking about his schedule for the season, he starts at the Tour de Hungary, Tour of Norway, like you said, probably the Bing Bang Tour, maybe his biggest race. I think it's probably the correct decision. I don't see it as a punishment at all. I think he needs to be kept out the spotlight for a year. I think he needs to get back to cycling, get back to some smaller races with less media coverage. I'm sure the media will be covering him pretty intensely, even if he's not at the biggest races, particularly in the Netherlands. But I think it's the right decision to ease him back into racing. It's going to be difficult for Groenewegan, let's be real here. I mean, I've seen news recently that he's had to be protected by police due to people making threats to Dylan Groenewegan after the incident at the Tour of Poland. Just horrible stuff to see. You don't want to see that at all, no matter the circumstances of the crash. I think it's the correct decision, definitely, to ease him back into racing, keep him out of the Grand Tours for a year, and hopefully he's able to mentally recover. It's going to be difficult for him, difficult for Jacobsen. Like I said, just a horrible situation for everyone involved. But hopefully Groenewegan is able to cycle, to sprint, to race as he did before, because when he can, we know he is one of the quickest sprinters in the world. So hopefully Groenewegan can recover mentally more than anything from the instance in Poland last year. And that, of course, goes for Fabio Jakobsen as well. We now swing on to the final section of today's podcast, the Riders to Watch section, where we maybe pick out a rider that isn't one of the best known riders in the team, but we fancy to really break out and have a great year in 2021, and we'll be keeping our eyes on effectively. So I'll go first, and I will be going for the Norwegian Tobias Foss, and I think he would be a popular pick for everyone as a rider to watch for Jumbo Visma, because simply he has won the Tour de l'Avenir, and if we look at the recent winners, we can go Tadej Pogacar, Egan Bernal, David Gaudu, Marc Soler and Miguel Angel Lopez. They are all prior to Tobias Foss, and we know the two prior to him, Egan Bernal and Tadej Pogacar, did go on to win the Tour de France 2 years later. Now, is Tobias Foss going to win the Tour de France in 2021 after winning the Tour de l'Avenir in 2019? I can almost categorically say that won't be happening, but he is a very strong GC rider nonetheless, and I feel he wasn't really allowed to show that fully in 2020 because he went to the Giro d'Italia in support of Steven Kruijswijk. He started with a 5th place on the opening time trial. He is a very strong time trialist as well as climber, which we also saw on stage 9, his final race of 2020, to the Roccaraso in the Giro d'Italia, where I believe Steven Kruijswijk was already suffering perhaps from his positive COVID test, where the whole team had to drop out ahead of the next day's stage, effectively ending Kruijswijk, effectively ending Tobias Foss's season. But he was able to beat Kruijswijk. He probably would have been able to stay further up the rows with the main GC protagonists at the Giro d'Italia. He finished in the same group actually as João Almeida. Of course, he's considered a breakout star of 2020. So I think Foss was really unlucky having to drop out of the Giro. Didn't get his opportunity at the Tour de France, obviously. I believe he is going to the Giro d'Italia this year. He'll ride Strada Tirreno and the Giro in 2021. Now, we've mentioned they're not really taking any of their top GC contenders to the Giro. Tobias Foss could well break out into a top 10 finisher at the Giro d'Italia this year, and I really believe he can do that.
The main rider I will focus on for next year is going to be Olav Kooij from the development team. He's going to join them later on this year in July. No real information right now on his future races, but he's had a solid 2020. He is 19 years old. And he won the All-End Nations Grand Prix as the leader of the Dutch team. He performed quite well in Croatia, winning both Trofei, Porec and Umag. He, I think, did well as well in Italy on the Settimana Internazionale Coppier Bartali, I believe winning a sprint stage ahead of some riders such as Ethan Hayter or Phil Barhouse. So he definitely knows how to sprint, and I mean, he might be one of the riders managing to profit from Dylan Groenewegan's absence for next year. Sure, he's going to join, as I said, later on in the season, but he could well and truly benefit from that and have his chance on some races that maybe he wouldn't have. So yeah, I'm quite curious to see how Olav Kooij is going to progress, and I mean, he's in a great team to evolve. So yeah, he's my pick for next year.
I'm really high on Olav Kooij as well. I think he is definitely one of the most talented sprinters in the peloton, so I'm intrigued to see what he can do in 2021.
That, nevertheless, is going to wrap it up. We do hope you've enjoyed this podcast. We hope you've enjoyed spending some time with us. Please let us know in the comments section over on YouTube what you thought of our podcast and what you thought of Team Jumbo Visma. What do you think of their transfers? What do you think they will do for 2021? And obviously, what you thought of our two riders, Tobias Foss and Olav Kooij. We'll see you in a very, very soon podcast. However, Joe, do you have a final word or a final prediction?
Van Aert in green, baby.
Van Aert in green, baby. See you soon.